Hey,
Hey man, how's it going?
yeah, I can hear you better now.
Okay, sweet.
Awesome. I mean, I like I like the landscape, the back of your car.
Well, it's where I've been hanging for like 3 weeks, so I feel like it's probably more appropriate. I think that in there was going to be like when there was a lull in activity, it was fine, but then somebody, right as I was setting up,
Yeah.
somebody came in and started yelling their order. I was like, all right,
Uh,
this is going to be a mess.
it's all good. Don't worry. How come? Where have you been for the past 3 weeks then?
So I've been basically all throughout the southern interior of BC, about I guess three to 4 hours away from Vancouver. So they're
Hmm.
starting to allow a little bit more local travel. So just been trying to take advantage of that, and yeah.
Must be so cool.
Yeah, it's been fun. It's been I come up here a lot during the spring, but I rarely have enough time to sort of do my own shooting. It's usually
Yeah.
guiding tours and things like that. So yeah, it's been nice just to
Whereabouts?
get out.
Whereabouts are you originally from then?
So I'm from Vancouver, which is right on the basically snugged right up against the U.S. border, so against
Hmm.
Washington State. So it's the southwest corner rather of
Yeah, yeah,
British Columbia. So, but the landscape changes dramatically as soon as you come east of the mountains where I am here.
yeah. I remember because obviously I was meant to be over there this August, and
That's right.
it's been obviously been cancelled now. But I was yeah, when I was looking at the whole landscape and stuff because I'm a birder and I was just like, oh, I couldn't actually wait, but we've had to rebook it for next August now, so
I see.
but it'll be just as good, I imagine. But I was going to ask you to start this off. Do you want to give everybody like an idea of how you started, doing what you are doing now, like guiding tours? How did you get into the wildlife, the photography, all that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I guess to start off, being from British Columbia, there's I wouldn't say that everyone has, the vast majority of people probably don't have a real big interest in birding or wildlife necessarily, but people are, as a rule, like pretty connected to the outdoors, and there's obviously a big outdoor recreation scene. Lots of hiking, lots of mountain biking, lots of a lot of kayaking, things like that on the
Yeah,
coast. So generally speaking, it's a hard place to sort of deny the presence of
yeah, I
the
can
landscape
imagine.
and all these things that we have at our doorstep here. So I think just by virtue of living where I do, that was kind of a natural sort of progression to
Yeah.
get into the outdoors in a big way, especially growing up in a family that really sort of fostered that. Um, but I guess talking more specifically about the birding and wildlife side of things, it was mainly my dad that got me into that.
Yeah.
He had a pretty big interest in it growing up and still does, and was interested in photography as well. So that's really where that came from. And then sort of slowly throughout my teen years, picking up more and more photography, and that becoming a bigger part of my life and one of my bigger passions.
Hmm.
That sort of marriage of the two really
Merged
came as
together.
yeah, really
Yeah.
came as a natural sort of progression of things.
Oh, nice.
Um, and then slowly just trying to transition that more into a career. I didn't really know if that was going to be the case, or if that was even a possibility at the start. Even in
Yeah.
my
Well.
relatively short time involved in the industry, things have changed a lot, and the ways in
Yeah.
which people earn a living through that has really transitioned. So yeah, but I'm glad to be where I'm at now and be able to.
Yeah, like, I
Uh,
mean, like you said, you bet you're based in such a nature and wildlife rich environment. What equipment are you using now then? Because we had this conversation, didn't we, on Instagram? But I can't remember what you said.
yeah, I kind of have a bit of a random assortment of gear. It's not a lot of it's super modern, really. Like I wouldn't consider myself much of a gearhead, I guess, but I've got
Yeah.
an older generation 500 f4, which is my sort of go-to big telephoto lens, which I use
Hmm.
more often than not with a 1.4 converter, and occasionally with the 2x as well. And then
Wow.
I've got a Canon 100 to 400, which is my sort of shorter lens, for wider landscape scenes, birds in the environment, animals in the environment, kind of a thing.
Hmm.
And then I've got a full frame body, which is the Canon 5D Mark III, which is getting a little long in the tooth at this point and it's beat up. It's taken a few tumbles, but still seems to be functioning. And then more of my sort of birding lens, I guess you could say, or body rather, is the 7D Mark II. Just
Yeah.
have that extra 60% on the crop factor is kind of nice for smaller birds, and
Yeah, I can imagine.
especially when I'm shooting down in the rainforest and things like that, it's handy to have.
I can
But yeah, and
imagine.
then an assortment of other flashes and the whole lot. So
Yeah, no, fair enough. I used to use a 7D2, and I have to admit I loved it. I thought it was awesome, and it helps when you know, like you said, with the smaller birds, it helps when you're photographing those because like I have to admit I moved on to full frame and did that. I got the 5D4 first, and then just recently moved on to the 1DX2. I do like it, but I do miss that crop factor.
Yeah, I think when people, especially when they're starting out and you might not have gone out and bought a 600 f4 that you can use with an extender and things like that, if you have a 300, a small 300 prime or even as these new zoom lenses that are becoming so popular, the 150 to 600s and things like that, having that extra 60%, not necessarily focal length, but effectively cropping in, whether you're on the 7D2 or a Nikon D500, getting that extra 1.5 crop. It's definitely can be nice for birds, especially if you don't love doing a whole lot of cropping, or you might not have a super high resolution body.
How do you find using converters then? Because I'm naive to use converters. I don't use them. To be fair, I've probably not given them as much of a trial and error as I should have done, but I've heard so many bad things about them, as in terms of like reducing image quality and sharpness and all that kind of stuff. I've always steered away from them.
Yeah.
But what's your opinion? Because you said you use the 1.4 and the 2 times.
Yeah, occasionally we'll use the 2 times. Generally speaking, when I use the 2 times, it's only during scenarios where I can really lock everything down and fully control, using live view focusing and I have something like a small roosting owl, for example. I was just using it the other day for that purpose, and I find for that kind of thing, when you're really controlling all of the variables and everything's super still, they're great. I wouldn't just use it as exploring around and just taking pictures of things. Plus, with my camera bodies, you can only use the center focus point, so that really kind of eliminates it for purposes at least. But the 1.4, it almost stays on my 500 all the time.
Really?
I find that really, for me at least, the main benefit of having a big 500 prime, obviously it focuses quite fast and it's very bright, and the sharpness is great. But I think really the main benefit that I've found is its ability to be used with a 1.4 to have an effective 700 millimeter lens. Because realistically, if I was only shooting at 500 all the time, I'd probably, for sake of mobility and just general ease of use, shooting with a smaller 300 f4 with an extender or one of these newer zoom lenses, I think even though there'd be a little degradation in image quality when compared to a big 500 prime, just the sake that the fact that you can move around so freely, that's I think a really liberating thing as a wildlife photographer when you're trying to be mobile and keep up with your subjects if they're on the move. But for birding, I think specifically the 500 with a 1.4 is kind of at least for me, I found that's my sort of go-to setup. And you do suffer a little bit in the sharpness category, but for me, I found that with people that get really hung up on sharpness like that, like talking about new lenses, and I'm sure you see it online, the bickering that takes place between this is better than that, and I only shoot this brand because of this extra sharpness. I really believe that there comes a point where humans can't really perceive that difference. Like once it's sharp, it's pretty much sharp. And unless you're looking at a massive, large format print through with a magnifying glass, I think the average person's probably not going to notice. But I guess the obsession that people have with all these things is what drives the these companies to keep
I can imagine
better and better products. So I suppose it's a good thing too that we're critical.
It gives companies an excuse to sell ridiculously expensive equipment.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I've always been, when it comes to gear, because obviously growing up and self-funding your photography, you have to sort of look at things through a bit of a practical eye and think, okay, well, I could go spend, what's a new Nikon or Canon 600 now? It's 17,000 Canadian or something like that. So, basically 15 US. I mean, that's getting crazy. I mean, that's the very car I'm sitting in is worth half that. So it's there comes a point where it's like I could have some added benefits that maybe I would notice, or I could take a great trip somewhere, or do I know what you mean. Away somewhere.
I know what you mean.
So I think I've always tried to look at it through that lens of sort of is this going to really help my photography in a way that's going to justify that sort of expense? Or
I mean, I watched.
Power to you if you can do it.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, if you could afford it, then why not? But I remember watching Glenn Bartley's 1DX Mark II video before I bought the 1DX Mark II, and he said the exact same thing. Is that moving from the 7D2? Obviously, they've both got the same megapixels, but you're just losing that crop factor. Is it really like can you really justify spending like £5,000 plus on a new camera body for what it's actually worth? Like, can you justify spending £5,000 more? And I think in most cases you probably can't.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's been interesting as working as a guide and a tour leader and things like that. I'm constantly associating with people that are mostly retired and obviously this is their life's passion, and this is what they're choosing to invest in for what they enjoy doing most, which I think is great. But it's interesting to see people that might just be beginning photography, or perhaps aren't quite as they don't quite have the skill set yet, but yet they have these really cutting edge cameras and lenses. And it's probably partly an envy thing when you're looking at these amazing kits that they have. But at the same time, it really does go to show that that's not the answer to problems you might face as a photographer when it comes to I couldn't get the shot, or in certain cases those top of the line cameras might make or break the scenario. But largely speaking, I mean, you can make awesome images with with a camera now that's a 15-year vintage, that's a 10 megapixel body. I mean, you look at the shots that the top pros of that time were coming away with, and it just goes to show that it's really, largely speaking, not so much about the gear. So I've always kind of tried to think of things that way, and but there does come a certain point, I think, in every photographer's career where they've got to graduate from that Canon Rebel, or I'm not sure what the Nikon equivalent would be these days, but I think there's a happy medium in there somewhere, probably.
Yeah, I mean you're pretty sorted for equipment then, aren't you? Really, I mean the 500 lens is pretty much spot on. The 5D3 is equally just as good. You're all right, aren't you? And I mean I don't really see why you would need to upgrade anytime soon, really, because
I'm happy with it. I'm getting the pictures, largely speaking, that I sort of imagine from a scenario. I don't feel like it's holding me back too much. I think it's more going to be a matter of, are they going to survive the abuse and and everything that they get put through. I think I've always used things, whether it be a vehicle or camera gear. I don't tend to buy things to sort of baby them and have them encased in their packaging and never scratch them. For me they're tools, and I sort of treat them as such.
Yeah.
This is probably if I ever go and try to sell used gear now through Instagram or something like that, anybody that watches this is just going to be a complete write-off. But yeah, so yeah, who knows what'll happen down the road here with mirrorless taking over and the rest of it. I was just, actually, you mentioned Glenn. He was just up here joining me for a few days as of, I guess he left a few days ago now. But we were having this conversation about gear and this new Canon mirrorless camera that's coming out fairly soon, it seems like, and whether at some point we're just going to have to surrender to the industry and how things are sort of all migrating towards that. But for the time being, I tend to focus on being out here and not so much online reading things. But at some point I'm going to have to probably make the leap, I would think. But
yeah, but I said the same thing to myself, because I don't think I can. I think I'm naive to it, because I like something big to hold, and after trying, I think I didn't use it as such, but I held it and had a fiddle around with it. The Sony, I can't remember, Sony A7R or something, the Sony mirrorless system. I couldn't picture myself using it.
When you're used to that robust feel, I know when you can put a battery grip on those cameras, it definitely has a nicer ergonomic to it. But I share that same sentiment of sort of them feeling a little bit more toy-like, or sort of just not quite as robust as a normal DSLR would be. But I think probably like anything, that just comes with time, getting used to the ergonomics and the feel of it. But I do think, especially when you're shooting with big lenses, it's nice to have that, despite the obvious added weight. And if you're hauling it around hiking, it's obviously those 1D series bodies, or those D5, D6 bodies are huge. So But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how things transition, and
I'll be interested to see where it goes.
Always sort of at the mercy of whatever happens. It's funny with wildlife photography. I don't think we're enough of a sort of driving force behind the development of these products, because even though we feel like we're in this big community, I think it's still quite a niche within you think about sports photographers or photojournalists or just general enthusiasts. I think we still make up a little sliver of the people out there.
I totally agree. Going from that, how have you found it being like, would you class yourself as a professional wildlife photographer?
Yeah, I definitely tend towards the wildlife side of things. I do a fair bit of landscape shooting, and I kind of like to think of myself as a bit of an all-around nature guy. But I think when you really look at the portfolio, it's definitely weighted more towards the birds and wildlife side of things.
How have you found, like, because obviously I'm at uni now, and I finish uni next year, so I've got one more year left in my degree. And obviously the big question for everybody in my year, and I've spoke to multiple people about this, but we're all, sat there like, how are we going to, break into the industry? How are we going to make, an impact big enough to, catch somebody's eye, or like a company's eye more specifically?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one, because I think, as I mentioned before, that things have transitioned so much ever since I became a professional. And I think that would have been, probably about the beginning of 2014 is where I sort of decided to, or where things just happened to transition that way. And that seems like a very short time ago, but the big boom in the interest of nature photography and wildlife photography specifically since then has been amazing. I mean, even just looking at my own local patches around the Vancouver area, just the amount of people out there now is really telling of the real influx in people interested in this side of things. So I think how I went about sort of making a name for myself and getting my foot in the door when it comes to guiding, it might be a little different than how I would have to approach it today, but I can only speak to my personal experience with that. So how I sort of got into it was right after high school. I got what was my dream job at the time, doing conservation biology work here in British Columbia, actually not far from where I am right now. I sort of, at that point I hadn't done any post-secondary. I had just been, I guess at that point I'd consider myself a real passionate naturalist. And so I had a good background in the wildlife and birding side of things, but not so much in the more formal scientific methods and things like that. So it was definitely a bit of a, they gave me a chance with that. And I had some contacts there that allowed me to start working in that field, and did really well there, and really enjoyed it. Learned a lot through that, but at a certain point, as I was doing that and being really involved in photography at the same time, there was a lot of, I wouldn't say painful moments, but definitely moments in the field where there's only so much stuff you can carry with you, and we'd have a lot of equipment to do with whatever we happened to be studying. But so many moments where I'd be looking at an animal or a bird just in the perfect situation, and my camera's 25 kilometers back at the truck, and it became clear that those feelings of missing out weren't going to go away until I really gave it a shot at trying to do this full time. So I think after that, that allowed me some freedoms to work in the summertime doing this biology work. Have put a lot of different great locations that I was finding in my back pocket for later, and then going back and really pursuing those photos. And over time, I just began guiding really small scale trips in and around Vancouver that had, to do with camera clubs and local groups. Yeah. And then slowly that became, that started to fill up my schedule. And before long, I was guiding both my own multi-day trips in British Columbia and guiding for Glenn Bartley's photo tour company in the tropics. So it all kind of came about pretty quickly. Like there wasn't a whole lot of time in between. I think it was just a matter of me committing and really kind of and just sort of getting that mindset of, okay, I got to make this work. I have to really commit to it and make a go of it. So I wish I had more insights in the way of making contacts and reaching out to companies and things like that, because I suspect now more than ever with Instagram and some of the advertising and things that go along with that whole world, that would probably be a pretty important element of it these days.
I can imagine. I mean, that's why I tried and tried to build like more of a network around myself, because I feel like that is quite important.
Yeah, I think especially now as things are becoming more and more saturated and the market becomes, there's no denying there's a ton of people out there that are doing wildlife photography now. And back when I started, kind of right around the advent of social media, there's a lot more sharing on forums and things like that. But now, I tend to keep a pretty small circle in general, but also just in the wildlife photography world, in terms of people that I shoot with and sort of stay in touch with regularly. But every now and then when I go and explore on Instagram, or I just start flipping through things, you'll see these stunning images and you're like, well, who's this now? And you start looking and it's like, wow, there's just an amazing assortment of people out there now. Especially in the UK, it's an amazing.
There are some good, great photographers.
You'd think in Canada, given how you're just basically wherever you go, you're immediately confronted with, especially out west here, with really dramatic scenery and wildlife and things like that. And I always remember starting out. Connor Stefaniston, who's guided a lot of tours with in British Columbia here, a really talented photographer. We both started around the same time, and we were sort of trying to reach out to other people around the area that were younger, and it came a point where we were thinking, I think we're sort of the one of very few, or two of very few wildlife photographers in Canada at that point that were sort of under the age of 20. And I remember we were always looking over to the UK scene, because it seems like there was a lot more youth over there that were interested in it, and became pretty close friends with people like Bertie Gregory and Will Nichols and people from the UK that had gotten started right around the same time we were. And it was always amazing to see how there is such a connection over there to the wildlife. And I'm not sure if it's because maybe there's more of because it's perhaps a lot of people living in the big cities there that need, have that real urge to get out and explore things. Whereas here, maybe we're a little more, I don't want to say jaded, but sort of used to just seeing things. You get, no matter where you live, you sort of get used to your surroundings, and you're not maybe as appreciative as you should be. So I think it's, we try to keep ourselves in check that way and always be appreciative. But yeah, it was always amazing just to see the differences there. But I think now more and more, I'm seeing more younger folks getting into it, and not just teens, but also just folks around my age now, and which is great, because I think that that can obviously spur people on to just make different decisions throughout their life that are a little more.
But that's why
impact.
Well, that's another reason I wanted to talk to you. And I actually, similar to what you just said, I looked over to the US and to Canada and places like that to look at, because like I said, I enjoyed and always loved my birds before I got into photography. Being like massively interested in the birds over in Canada and North America especially. I came across photographers like yourself and Connor, and I don't know if you all know like Ray Hennessy and
he's back in New England somewhere, I think. So
I found people like you. I think you and Connor were actually, like you said, the first two people that I really bumped into on Instagram. And was like, these guys, like, are awesome. In fact, I think Connor, I actually started following after he got. Is it what did he won an award? Is it like the not British Wildlife? It was like Wildlife Photographer of the Year.
He won the what's now called the Rising Star Portfolio Award in Wildlife Photographer of the Year. I think at the time it was called the Eric Hosking Portfolio Award. So he won that twice. So that was that was a really good boost for him at that point. And that kind of, I think he can probably attribute a lot of his sort of notoriety to those few contest wins there.
That is how I think I found him, and then found you through his profile, and I think actually I found you through Glenn's videos on YouTube or something like that.
Okay.
And Glenn Bartley was another one of those photographers. But I wanted to create these videos specifically so people could, see how you and people like Glenn and Connor and stuff have managed to break into the industry. Because you're quite young still, aren't you? Like you, Connor, are still really young. So for people like like me and my peers, especially like the younger lot to you guys, see you guys as inspiration. because you guys have managed to do what we want to do in the future.
Gosh,
Which
it's funny to hear that, because I really appreciate the kind words, but yeah, it always strikes me as funny, because I still feel like I'm only getting started, and obviously in this industry, especially the folks that I work with during workshops and that, it tends to be an older crowd, and most of the professionals too, people that are still really this sort of the big names in the wildlife photography scene that have been for many years over here. People like Paul Nicklin or Tom Mangelson, Art Wolf, these big names. They tend to be more of a slightly older crowd, and so for me, I still feel like the sort of small fry that's looking up at all these people that have been in the scene for so long. But but it's neat to sort of start to fill that role a little bit for other people, and be able to potentially pass on whatever advice I can, and help inspire and all that. But that's great to hear.
Yeah, no, definitely, 100%. So do you, from all your time in the field and stuff, do you actually have a best memorable encounter?
Yeah, I actually just saw. I'm in the city of Kamloops right now, which is sort of a more of an arid, almost desert-like place. So it's but you climb up out of the town, the middle of town here, and you get up into the more lush mountains. And actually just had a nice lynx encounter not far from here the other day. So that definitely, when on the topic of most memorable wildlife encounter, the lynx comes to mind. One thing that I've really found is that the more I seem to struggle and kind of suffer a little bit for a photo, the more memorable it can be, regardless of the quality of it. And you always hope that what comes of it ends up being a great shot, but that's obviously not always the case, especially when we're partially relying on luck and just persistence, and hopefully getting something by the end of it. But definitely the lynx comes to mind. But on the topic of owls, I've been sort of fixated on owls for a long time, but particularly in the spring here in BC. Up where I am, there's a lot of nesting that takes place, and owls are one of the sort of highlight species for me, or highlight families. And a couple of years ago, I guess it was probably 2017, 2018 perhaps, Connor and I built a tree stand adjacent to a great gray owl nest. And I ended up basically sitting in this tree. It was a little deer hunting tree stand that we have that's usually meant for archery hunting. So it's not particularly comfortable when you just sort of sit on this little, it's about this sheet, the size of a piece of, printer paper or something like that. And we're sitting there in this tree. Connor was there for a few days. I stuck around for a while longer. And, but within say 20 meters of this great gray owl nest, and they were completely, I wouldn't say oblivious to us, but just, if you've ever seen a great gray owl, especially one that's way out in the middle of nowhere, they seem to have no semblance of what humans are, and certainly don't perceive us as a threat. So just to be in their world like that, and to have them be totally unperturbed by our presence, was pretty special. And it just so happened to be, I found a number of those nests over the year, but this one, just in terms of the background and the proximity to the nest, and just the overall how photogenic the
well, it's that whole aspect of having the birds to yourselves, isn't it? Because
that's really been the kind of a motivation for me for a long time, is that especially as things become more and more popular, as much as I can consider myself a pretty sociable person, when it comes to wildlife photography, there's a real disconnect between that. Like, I have my time in the city now and then, and good to catch up with friends and that. But when I'm out doing this sort of stuff, if I can just focus and be totally by myself around subjects, I think that, to me, often that's when I come away with the more powerful experiences. And I think it also lends, there's just something about it that helps
I would totally
on
agree.
the better imagery.
Totally
so that's sort of what I've been up to for the last couple of weeks, as well as just being out here on my own and searching for spots. And
it's nice to have a detox from everyday life, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I don't spend a ton of time associating with the city a lot. I'm obviously not having to commute too much and things like that, but I do live right 20 minutes from downtown Vancouver. So even just the day to day there sometimes is you're in the thick of it. So coming out to places like this, and thankfully in BC, it doesn't take us that long, generally speaking, to get away from the hustle and bustle of things, and just get out to where you can be the only person you'll see all day. And so that's something I really value about living where I do.
I can totally imagine. I mean, it's like it's a privilege, isn't it, really, to be able to grow up and live somewhere like that.
Yeah, I felt, and never have I felt more fortunate and appreciative of that now, because with everything that's happening right now,
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine. We all complain and whinge about the quarantine side of things, and we're all cooped up. But thankfully, if you live within short distance of green spaces around you, it really is. It does make things so much easier, I'd imagine. So I've
Yeah,
felt
no,
more,
it does.
really
It
fortunate now,
definitely does.
because I'm not confined within the city. So that's been
Yeah, no,
a
it
real
definitely does. I agree with
privilege.
that because I mean, I know everyone does complain about this whole quarantine thing, but I've actually found that, in the past 2 months while everybody's been locked down, I've been out and I've created, two different photo series that I'm reasonably happy with. I know I've definitely not put as much time in as I would have liked, but I've created, series that I would never have, had the time to have created before, and seen stuff that I've never been able to see before, and spend more time at like, my home patches in like the forests and the mountainy areas, than I ever have done before, because I've always been busy with university work or full-time work. I only work in a pub, but like that takes up 5 days, and then the other 2 days you don't really want to do much because you're tired. So, I've been more than fortunate to be able to get out and shoot series and photo stories that I never have had the chance to shoot before. So I'm, incredibly fortunate in that aspect. But, I mean, you have obviously been very productive, and the whole reason are having this chat is to talk about your barn owl image.
Yeah, pre quarantine, but I think I was in my own quarantine on my own in that barn for for the better part of over a week at that point. But
Wow.
yeah, I think going back to your previous comment there, I think when you talk about local patches and things like that, no matter where you live, the grass is sort of always greener in a way. Like, I'm sure lots of folks from the UK look over at some of the places like Yellowstone or the Canadian Rockies or the west coast of British Columbia, Great Bear Rainforest, places like that, and are obviously they'd love to get there, but you hear people here wanting to get over to where you guys are, and photographing the puffins and badgers and all the amazing things that you guys have there too. But I think what's happened with this is that it's really given people an appreciation for what they have close to them, and like you say, allow them to really try to capitalize on some of the free time. And obviously not everyone's been afforded that luxury during this, so we've got to think about that for sure. But for the folks that have had the time to explore some of those local opportunities, I think it's a good exercise in just appreciating what you have nearby, and learning to really try to harness the potential of those spots for photography. So I think it's a good learning experience and just a good little check in with.
Yeah, no, I do. It's so nice. Like, I don't think anybody has ever had the chance to spend as much time near home exploring their back gardens and wildlife, etc., as they have now.
Heightened awareness all of a sudden.
Yeah, exactly. It's nice. It's really nice.
And hopefully that can carry over. I mean, certainly for most aspects of life, I think everyone's going to sort of return to the normal here as things start to hopefully progress. But hopefully some of that can stay, that maybe a little bit of interest spark there, or just even generally speaking, being more observant, because I think, you can't care about things without taking notice of them and starting to care about them. So it's, I think that'll be a powerful sort of silver lining to this whole weird thing.
I think people will leave quarantine and realize how lucky they are, especially the people maybe outside of the cities. In fact, maybe people more so in the cities, because they've had more chance to appreciate more urban wildlife. Will start to appreciate more the wildlife that's actually on their doorstep. And people that have obviously never had any experiences with wildlife will have, hopefully take out of this, how awesome some of the wildlife is that lives near them, and maybe start to take more of an interest. Because like you said, people won't care about stuff that they're not interested in, or that kind of thing. So I hope, for one, that people come out of quarantine with that attitude. I'm sure quite a lot of people will. But I mean, we'll move on to your barn owl image, because that's like the big thing, and I'm super interested in how you took it, because I actually tried for a shot like that not long ago, and I got absolutely nothing. So
yeah, there's a lot of room for error with it, as I started to realize more and more through that process. But I'm glad you liked that one. It was
massively.
Sort of
how did you actually go about it? Like, you said before, like at the end of a week you got that photo. So it took you a week to get that image.
Yeah, I think it was even. Yeah, at this point I forget exactly, but I think it was 9 nights spent in that general area. But but that makes it sound like it's this absolutely insurmountable task to get that photo. But it was largely due to me being a little bit confused with bits of the gear, and I wasn't using the proper sensor at the time. So there was a lot of fussing around with using the wrong bit of gear for the task. But it was a good learning experience at that. And as I said before, I get some weird. I get a kick out of having projects like that really make you sort of kind of suffer a bit, and puts you through the paces. And I think when something's hard won like that, it always feels a little bit a little bit sweeter at the end when you get it. But basically, just to, I guess, sort of preface the shot a little bit with some perspective on these owls and how I went about finding them, because that's oftentimes, at least for me, is the crux of it all, is finding the right scenario. I guess if there's one thing that I focus on most with my photography, or just my general time outdoors, is I prefer not to sort of go to known locations, or sort of I'd hate to coattail off somebody else's hard work of finding something. And I think that's really kind of a process that for me it always feels like it really completes the whole experience, as if I've gone out and done the work to find something. And as a result, I end up learning a lot more about the subjects, rather than just showing up to a point on a map and there it is in front of you. And obviously this is I have a certain amount of luxury of time to be out there doing this full time. So I can afford to get out there and sort of find these unique spots. So that was one big motivation with this, was first of all, just going out and finding these barns where these barn owls live. Here in BC, the barn owls kind of are right at the northern limit of their range. It's such a cosmopolitan species. I mean, I think they're on every continent except for Antarctica.
Pretty much, yeah.
So you sort of think of them as these abundant birds, or these sort of wide-ranging birds. But up here, at least in British Columbia, I think the only other place in Canada is southern Ontario. So they just barely squeak into the country. So they're not overly numerous. So that was the other thing, is just finding one to begin with. But basically I went out and I had a kind of area in mind that I wanted to focus on, that was a little patch of agricultural land not too far from where I live. And I actually used Google Earth a lot, and Google Street View to scout out areas. I like to try to, when I'm out scouting and I'm trying to make the best use of my time, I try to be as sort of efficient as I can. So I went the night before, or whenever it was, I went and just plunked a bunch of points down on Google Maps that I had seen. That looks like a barn. Go on Street View. That looks like an old photogenic one.
That's exactly what I do.
Oh, cool. Yeah, no, it's an amazing bit of technology that
Google satellite.
There's roads. I think the road that leads the Dempster Highway, which is the road that leads all the way into the Arctic Circle through the Yukon.
Yeah.
I'm pretty certain that you can do that entire road on Google Street View, and it's that like prime fall color. It was Connor actually that discovered this. He we're roommates, and we share a home office for our business and that. And one day he goes, "Come over here, look at this." And it's just like all of these photo ops that you could take screenshots probably and put them on your website. But anyways, so that's a super handy tool to use for especially out in the countryside where you are. I'm imagining it's perfect.
So I was saying, so on the series that I've just created was on the pied flycatchers over here in the UK, and albeit they are in a bird box, but I did the exact same thing. I had it must have been like 3 years ago that I did it now, but I zoomed out of where I live, turned it on to satellite mode, and I went to dropped pins in areas that it looked like there was virtually no people, little side tracks down lanes and all that sort of stuff. And I actually I found this location which was, happened to be, an absolute winner. And then for the last 3 years, I've followed the same family of pied flycatchers every year, and they've raised successful broods every year. But that is exactly how I found it.
They head down to Africa, I'm sure, and back every.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing to be able to revisit them like that. Yeah, it's. I think it's all about trying to harness the tools that we have out there for scouting things, and just to try to streamline that whole process. Because obviously, you can spend ages just driving around aimlessly and bumping into things, which there's something to be said for that too. You never know what you'll find. But when you're really fixated on one particular subject, it definitely can pay off to do some work beforehand.
Yeah, of course.
So that ended up being really important with this project. And then there's the next step of it, which is, gaining access to, because largely these are on private property.
Yeah.
But if I've learned anything, and this might vary depending on where you are in the world, I remember, I get pretty used to hopping fences and things like that here in Canada, because we have just so much leased ranch land that's out there. And these fences are largely just to contain cattle, and they don't really necessarily signify that you're not supposed to go into a certain area. So I just have this default of middle of nowhere, you haven't seen a person or a structure for 50 kilometers. Yeah, hop over that fence, go see that great gray owl out there. I remember I went birding in Texas for the first time, and I was following a scissor-tailed flycatcher through this area, and I go to hop over a barbed wire fence, and my friend, who's an American, goes, "What are you doing?" And so I think, I don't know, I'll just walk out there 100 yards and photograph this bird. And I was quickly schooled in the cultural differences between Canada and perhaps rural Texas in trespassing or being as sort of I was clearly naive to it a little bit. But anyway, so depending on where you are in the world, you might get a different response. But I found that, at least in the areas that I'm searching, people are super enthusiastic about if you're there and you're interested in wildlife, and they're largely speaking pretty willing to
help
and let you have a look around, and it's amazing how willing people are to let you on their land or share with you what they've got going on around their place. So I think all you can do is ask, and you might be surprised as to the sort of access that you can get to places that you otherwise might think are totally off limits. So that was sort of the second thing here, was just finding a way to explore these spots. But the barn that you see in this photo was sort of one of the last ones I ended up checking on that particular day, and stuck my head inside, and sure enough, there was a barn owl roosting in there. So I sort of, gauging the scenario there, he seemed quite skittish. He sort of flew towards the other side of the barn. So I got out of there and let him roost for the rest of the day. And then I started to figure out what I wanted to photograph and how I wanted to sort of go about doing it. I knew that I wouldn't be able to photograph inside the barn. I didn't want to stress him out, and he was clearly not too interested in me being in there with him. And thankfully I found on this barn these perfect hayloft windows where the shutters of the window, or the actual doors themselves, were open, just the sort of perfect amount. And I figured that at dusk it would likely come out of that window. There was a few other little openings in the barn, but nothing that was such an obvious flyaway for it. So I went back on a couple of different evenings, and just to make sure that this was a habitual sort of thing for this bird each night. And sure enough, every night went straight out the doors. So then I got to work and tried to figure out how I was going to do it.
How did you set it all up? How did you set the flashes up, and how did you choose the composition?
So one thing I really enjoyed, especially if I'm incorporating sort of the hand of man into my photos, I don't have a ton of shots like that. I've got sort of another similar shot of a fox in a barn window, and the one thing that I've always really liked about some of those types of photos is just the natural symmetry of the architecture. And then, with a central wildlife subject, I think it makes a pretty powerful composition. So that was kind of the general theme with this one. The challenging part became I couldn't set anything up during the day, because if I was to go into that barn, the barn owl would certainly spook. And they do get predated on during the day I've seen them killed by eagles and things like that when they've been forced to hunt in the middle of the day. So it's not a great thing for a barn owl to be flying out in the middle of the day. So I didn't want to go in there. So basically every night that I would set things up, I would have to wait for it to exit the barn to go hunting. And then I would go in and start setting things up. Thankfully, I didn't need a ton of gear. It was just basically 2 pieces of gear inside the barn. There was an old rickety ladder that I was able to climb up to the hayloft window, which was a little unnerving. But over time, I learned if it didn't snap the first time, I'm probably good. But I basically, inside that hayloft window, I had a single flash, a Canon speedlight, and I had a sensor. So the idea was that the owl would pass over the sensor and trigger the flash during the exposure, which on paper sounds, you set it up, it'll happen, perfect. But as I quickly realized, if you don't have the correct sensor for that, it makes life really difficult. So to start, I was using a passive infrared sensor, like you'd see in Camtraption's PIR sensor, or any of those more of trail cam oriented, or camera trap, I should say, oriented sensors, which are great for those purposes. I mean, they're fantastic products, and those guys are really helpful in giving me some feedback on what was happening. But what I discovered was that for a bird that's moving that fast,
Yeah.
You need something that's a lot more precise. And what I found out pretty quickly was that these owls are so well insulated with their feathers that they don't give off much of a heat signature at all. And that's, I think, one thing that passive infrared really
I would
keys
never
in on.
have thought about that.
Yeah, I didn't either. It was those guys at Camp Contraptions that really helped me out with that, and were really candid in their advice, and maybe this just isn't the one for the job kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And as I say, for doing trail camera or photo traps and camera traps and things like that, it's an awesome product. But for this, what I ended up using was I bought a Cognisys Saber, it's called, which is not passive infrared. It's a LiDAR beam. And it's meant for much faster action. If you've seen bats skimming over the surface of water drinking, that's sort of it's purpose built for things like that are a little more a fraction of a millisecond makes a difference kind of a thing, as opposed to a bare sort of lumbering past your setup. So that ended up being the really crucial bit of gear for that. So basically what it is it's this beam that is emitted and it comes back and is received by the same sensor. And I believe how I had it set up at maximum sensitivity, it's every 10 milliseconds it emits a new beam.
Wow.
And you can set a predetermined distance to that beam. So let's say 10 meters. So each time that it is emitted and comes back, it's sensing, in that case, the barn roof above, or the ceiling rather. But as soon as something breaks that, and all of a sudden it's going, okay, 10 meters, 10 meters, 10 meters, 2 meters, it's going to fire whatever's connected to it. So in that case, I could have connected the whole camera and the flash, and just have it all shoot at once. But the main worry with that was that what would happen is any additional lag time that might be associated with triggering the camera, it could have compromised the pose in which I captured the owl, or it could have just simply been past where the flash was illuminating. So what I chose to do is just have that sensor trigger my flash. And that ended up being a really important part of the whole thing. So basically what I did in order to have that, when the flash fired, actually captured by my camera, is in knowing what time typically that owl would exit the barn, because they tend to be very habitual. For example, I'm monitoring a bunch of small owls up here right now, flammulated owls, and photographing their nests.
On your Instagram. It looks awesome.
They're it's been really cool to work with them and be around them so much. But the males, I'm finding, are so precise with when they leave their roost that it's actually shifted as the days have gotten longer. So I forget how many more minutes per day it gets longer around here. It's say 4 or 5 minutes for sunset later each night. They're so keyed in on that I can basically say, okay, as he's got about 90 seconds, then he's going to leave his roost. So similar to these guys, the barn owls were really precise with that too. So I kind of knew when, approximately they were going to leave. So I would just start running a continuous time lapse of these long exposures through that. And, there was the risk that in between frames for that, half second where the camera recycles and then starts a new exposure, that technically the owl could pass through that. But I mean, you'd have to be horribly unlucky for that to happen. So I was just banking on, of luck basically at that point to have things.
Yeah, but that's clever, because I would never have thought to shoot a time lapse and hope that it captures. I think that's awesome. That's such a cool way of doing it. I would never have thought about that.
Yeah, it's a funny thing. Sometimes the best skills that you learn, I think, as any type of photographer, I'm sure, is just the learning the workarounds around, gear limitations, or just, when we have subjects that we can't predict or we can't dictate what they do, you really have to sort of, you're at the mercy of them and the conditions. So I think being able to problem solve like that and kind of trying to make things work in a situation that's not ideal. And who knows, there's probably other ways of doing it that I overlooked, but that's a fun part of it for me too, is that it keeps your brain really active and keeps you problem solving.
Yeah, no, it's cool. I mean, like I said, I wouldn't have thought about that, but I probably would keep that in the back of my mind for, if I ever came to shoot something like that next time. That's a smart way of going about it. But are you happy yourself with how it came out? Did you get the photo that you thought you were going to get?
Yeah, it was interesting because the conditions were different each time I would go. Sometimes there would be low fog. This was right at the beginning of the winter, basically, and it's in Vancouver. It's extremely, it's a similar climate to say London or something like that, where quite moderate in the summer, but quite rainy and sort of dull in the winter for weather. So that was one problem, is that I was getting rained out a fair bit. And I was also dealing with fog, which with long exposures and flash is kind of a nightmare.
Yeah.
So that was a challenge, but I think given the circumstances, I think I was really happy with how that came out. I wanted some texture in the sky. I didn't really want stars, because I think at that focal length and at that shutter speed of about 30 seconds, they would have been not quite pinpoint, but not quite streaking. So it would have been this kind of awkward in between, these little tiny streaks of stars. So I ideally wanted a cloudy evening that had some texture to the sky still.
Yeah.
And I think that came out pretty well in the shot, a little bit of a mood to the sky.
Yeah, it looks awesome. I think that must be I think that's my favorite photo, on at least on your Instagram. I don't know where else you post photos, but on your Instagram, that was like the photo that I looked at. I mean, honestly, that must have been like, I think I looked at it and it must be my favorite photo for like weeks on end, because I was just like, that looks so cool. Like, it looks so good. Like, I genuinely, if I would have got that, I would have been like, that is like, in a humble way, I would have been like, that looks awesome. Like that. Yeah, because it's nice. It's nice because I see like, like portraits and, obviously flight shots of barn owls in the evening over here, but to have created like an image that's so different, like, the classic barn owl leaving a barn, but looks, yours looks really dramatic, like you said, with the clouds, and the way you've lit it with flash looks so dramatic. But I think it's so eye-catchingly different to any other barn owl photos that I've seen.
Oh, cool! I'm glad it came across that way. I find sometimes when you get fixated on an image like that and sort of just keep working on it,
yeah.
It's really easy to become so emotionally invested in it that you forget that maybe this isn't really that great an idea or that great a result in the end. And I think that's sometimes we have to have a little, take a step away from our shots for a while and look back at them with fresh eyes. But I'm glad that it translated that way too, and people seem to really like that one. So happy with the end result.
Yeah, it definitely did. It definitely appealed like that to other people that I know as well, because having shown your image to other people, and other people, like, I live with some of the people on my course at the moment in third year housing, and even because a couple of us, on the same course, same interests, all that kind of stuff, we all looked at each other and was like, have you guys seen this photo? Like, this photo is so good. It's so good. Honestly, right? It's awesome. So obviously I'm hearing from you that you're glad that you got it, is a bit of a relief to me, because if you'd have said, it didn't come out as well as I thought it was going to, I was like, what?
Yeah, I think it's good to be self-critical, and I think that's if I teach anything on my workshops in terms of, like, apart from the techie side of things, but just the mindset that it takes to get to a higher level of photography, you really need to be self-critical, and you need to you kind of have to be a little bit harder on yourself, to push yourself. At the same time, I think it is good to not to necessarily be too self-aggrandizing or self-congratulatory and just thinking you're the best thing out there. But I do think that when you do finish a project, or you come away with a photo that you're really happy with, it's good. You gotta keep things positive, and because it's got to be fun at the end of the day. If you're just out there beating your head against the wall, trying all these difficult photos, it can take you out of the moment a little bit, maybe, or there's this disconnect between the wildlife or the landscape.
Yeah, exactly. I've had that many times where, like, I've been out a series in mind, or a particular photo in mind. For example, nightjar over here. I mean, I'm not sure what species of nightjar you'll get around you, but the nightjar that we get here, just the usual European nightjar. Obviously not coming out till dark, all that kind of stuff. And I did go out on a few evenings, but I mean, I haven't really got. What I really need to invest in is a flash bracket to start avoiding, like red eye and stuff. But only just recently, I think tomorrow night I'm out on a shoot for nightjar specifically, and at the moment I've problem solved it to having my girlfriend one side of me, my friend the other side of me, with a flash each and a torch each to eliminate red eye and trying to capture a nightjar flying. But I've been trying, a variety of techniques for the past like 3 or 4 weeks and not had anything. But like you said, I've tried not to take myself out of the moment because, being a birder, I love being able to sit there and listen to nightjars and, just actually watch them because they're actually really rare now. Like up from where I am in the Lake District, there's hardly any pairs. So, to be able
Right.
to be able to keep myself in the moment and not be totally gutted about, not having a photograph that evening or, that kind of thing. I think that's really important with photography is that you don't get so in depth with the photos that then you take yourself away from, like what is actually happening.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's good to have a bit of a laser focus on things at times to really get stuff done, and have a bit of a competitive edge that you can say, okay, I really want to go out and get this shot, or I want to do better than I did last time, or better than him or her, or whatever the case is. I think there's a healthy amount of that is good. But like you say, if you become so fixated on things that it just becomes this disconnect, I think that's at the end of the day, maybe is why you should be out there. At least for me, the perspective has always been, or sort of the motivation rather, has always been having great experiences with wildlife, and then the sort of incidental is the image at the end of things. And that's also one reason that I really like the scouting side of things and finding my own subjects is it forces you to, like I've been up here or in the general sort of BC area, central BC area for the better part of 3 weeks now, 3.5 weeks, and sort of camping the whole time wherever I happen to be. And I've photographed for maybe a total of a few hours during this time, just really quick little, when the opportunities finally present themselves. So I think with that in mind, when you're doing the scouting, it forces you to just leave your gear, because if I'm walking around here all day, if I had my full backpack with me, I'd be crippled by this point. It would just be brutal. So it just forces you to just spend the time out there, binoculars, backpack, and just kind of taking it in. And so that's been a nice sort of product of the sort of scouting that takes place. Is you really do appreciate where you are and the things that you're seeing, regardless of whether or not you get a great shot. And I think you just have to have a realization that there's gonna be a few painful moments every now and then where you don't quite, you're not able to race back to the car and grab your gear in time, but that just comes with the territory, I guess.
Yeah, no, of course. Do you have any like major plans for the future, like in terms of like what species you want to photograph? Plans for the company you and Connor run, photographic series that you want to produce, anything like that?
Yeah, I think right now, I guess the big question on everybody's mind that works in the tourism industry is what are we going to come back to after this, and how much red tape is there going to be around traveling internationally and even domestically. So I'm not trying to get too hung up on that right now, because obviously there's nothing that anybody can really do at this point but wait. So in terms of my, our company here in BC and guiding elsewhere, I'm just sort of waiting to see how things progress that way. And I'm hopeful that we can return to a pretty much normal life after this, in terms of my travel and my guiding engagements. But I'm thankful to have some tours that are really well established here in BC, that I can hopefully continue to run without having to travel too far afield. Mm-hmm. So hoping to just keep progressing that as things return to or perhaps a new normal after this, but at least to a point where people can begin traveling again and getting more involved in ecotourism again. But on the topic of more personal photography pursuits, that's been a nice silver lining to this as well, is that normally right now I would be up doing my loon photography workshops, which I love doing, but they're definitely very, they're very involved, and we're working super long days for a month and a half, and we're, have to be very focused on that and our clients at all times, of course. So doesn't tend to lend really well to doing my own photography. Which is okay. Again, I just love being up there. But this has been a really nice month in order to try to focus on a few targets. And I think, obviously, like everyone else, owls are a huge focus for me, and I've always loved them. And I think I'm getting closer to getting a pretty full portfolio of most of the Canadian owls at this point. or at least a decent number of them.
I mean,
So
cool.
at a certain point, I'd like to have a nice full portfolio there, and perhaps have some sort of publication associated with that. But I've never set many super long-term goals. I'm just really happy to be out doing what I love doing and having these experiences with nature. But I think at some point down the line, I get a lot of requests for publishing a book of some kind, and I don't think I'd want to jump into that too early, as BC is such a diverse and huge place that I think doing anything trying to encompass that, that's several lifetimes of work. So I think I'm going to have to pare things down to a more attainable, smaller focus, perhaps. That's something that I've thought about.
Or a location that would be good, like a small chunk of BC, or a specific habitat. That I can imagine that would be quite good. But I mean, I could also imagine choosing one habitat would also come with a whole load of species, a whole load of plants.
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing that's really interested me thinking on a slightly smaller scale. One thing that's always fascinated me is the transition from the coast, where we receive, I guess what would we have in Vancouver? I mean, there's places on the coast that have literally meters of rain per year, versus where I am here. There's areas here that receive 15 centimeters of rain per year, not far from where I am. So that transition in a relatively small space has always been really fascinating. And obviously, along with that change in landscape, you have a huge change in not only bird diversity, but plant ecosystems and all the rest. So I think that transition would be a really cool thing to sort of
document,
focus on in a book. So yeah, I think that's something that I've often thought about, and perhaps down the road we'll pursue a little more, a little more strongly, or sort of with more of a focus on that.
That would be, we've been like an hour and a half nearly. So I'll let you run if you want, because I'm sure you're busy. But I cannot explain to you how much I appreciate you doing this, because you've been like a massive inspiration to me and loads of people that I know. So I really appreciate you taking the time out to do this. It's been a real pleasure.
Anytime. Great to chat with you, and anytime get to talk shop a little bit about gear and the whole photo world is great, especially after I've been on my own for however many days here. Probably getting a little bit crazy. So it's good to,
Mate,
I think a nice check-in with human contact, and back into the city here for a little bit. But looking forward all the same to getting back out there and chasing some more images, and seeing images from other photographers such as yourself that are a really awesome level and inspiring all the same. So
thank you, mate. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. It's been a massive pleasure.
You got it, man. Best of luck with this, and look forward to hearing some more conversations with the other photographers you chat with. So
I look forward to it. See you soon.
All right, man. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.